August 27th, 1943. Hauptmann Werner Baumbach circles the massive four-engine bomber sitting on Rechlin test facility's main apron, his leather flight jacket dark with sweat despite the cool morning air. The captured American B-24 Liberator stretches 67 feet across the concrete, its twin tail fins catching the early sun like cathedral spires. Baumbach has flown everything in the Luftwaffe inventory, from nimble Messerschmitts to lumbering Heinkels, but nothing prepared him for this. 10 50-caliber machine guns. Baumbach counts them again, walking the aircraft's perimeter. Nose turret, tail turret, ball turret hanging beneath the fuselage like a steel egg, waist positions on both sides, and the distinctive top turret just aft of the cockpit. Each position bristling with twin barrels capable of firing 850 rounds per minute, 7,000 pounds of defensive firepower on a single aircraft. This isn't a bomber. It's a flying fortress that makes our heaviest fighters look like shooting gallery targets. The Liberator had arrived at Rechlin 3 days earlier, delivered by circumstance rather than combat. Second Lieutenant James R. Denton's crew had been returning from a raid on Wiener Neustadt when engine trouble and fuel starvation forced an emergency landing at what his navigator insisted was a Swiss airfield. The swastikas painted on the hangars told a different story. Denton's crew became prisoners. Their B-24, serial number 42-40358, became the most valuable intelligence asset the Luftwaffe had captured since the war began. Oberst Adolf Galland, General of Fighters, had flown in personally from Berlin to observe the evaluation. Standing beside Baumbach, Galland's face showed the professional concern of a commander who'd spent 2 years watching American bomber formations grow larger and more heavily defended with each passing month. Our pilots report that attacking these formations is like flying into a wall of steel. Now I need to know if they're exaggerating from combat fatigue or if the Americans have actually created something we can't effectively counter. Baumbach climbed through the B-24's belly hatch, his boots finding purchase on the narrow catwalk that ran through the bomb bay. The interior revealed engineering philosophy that differed fundamentally from German aviation doctrine. Where Luftwaffe bombers emphasized crew efficiency through cramped workspaces and minimal redundancy, the American aircraft sprawled with systems designed around operational effectiveness rather than weight optimization. The flight deck alone accommodated 4 crew positions. Pilot and co-pilot sat side by side behind massive control yokes that looked more like truck steering wheels than aircraft controls. Behind them, the flight engineer's station featured panels displaying every engine parameter imaginable: oil pressure, cylinder head temperature, manifold pressure, fuel flow, all monitored through gauges that German bombers consolidated into simplified displays requiring less instrumentation weight. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Navigator and bombardier occupied the nose compartment, surrounded by plexiglass that provided nearly unrestricted visibility forward and below. The Norden bomb site, already legendary in German intelligence reports, sat mounted in the bombardier's position like some exotic astronomical instrument. Baumbach examined the device with professional appreciation. American bombing accuracy exceeded Luftwaffe capabilities by significant margins, and this optical mechanical computer represented one reason why. But the defensive armament dominated Baumbach's attention as he moved through the aircraft's interior. The nose turret, capable of traversing through nearly 180 degrees, covered the entire forward hemisphere with twin 50-caliber guns. Ammunition boxes held hundreds of rounds in belts that fed smoothly through the weapon's mechanisms. The turret's electric drive motors hummed as Baumbach tested the controls, rotating the position with mechanical precision that required minimal physical effort from the gunner. Moving aft through the bomb bay, Baumbach entered the waist section where 2 gunners manned open window positions on opposite sides of the fuselage. The 50-caliber guns mounted here swiveled on flexible mounts, allowing coverage of the aircraft's vulnerable midsection where German fighters preferred to attack. Spent cartridges littered the floor around each position, evidence of the combat this particular aircraft had survived, before mechanical failure forced its surrender. The ball turret beneath the fuselage represented American engineering ingenuity, applied to a problem German bombers had simply accepted as unsolvable. A gunner curled inside this rotating sphere could engage targets directly below the aircraft, eliminating the blind spot that Luftwaffe fighters exploited during attacks from beneath bomber formations. The position looked impossibly cramped, requiring a small-statured crew member who could operate effectively while suspended in a mechanical sphere spinning through 3 axes of rotation. Yet the system worked, providing defensive coverage that German bombers couldn't approach. Baumbach squeezed through the narrow passage over the bomb bay and entered the aft fuselage section. Here, the tail gunner occupied the most isolated position on the aircraft, sitting in a compartment separated from the rest of the crew by the entire length of the fuselage. Twin 50-caliber guns pointed rearward, covering the approach vector that German fighter doctrine emphasized for attacks on bomber formations. The tail position's field of fire overlapped with coverage from the waist guns and ball turret, creating interlocking zones of defensive fire that left no safe approach angle for attacking fighters. The top turret, positioned just aft of the flight deck, completed the defensive sphere. Another pair of 50-caliber guns in an electrically powered mounting that could engage targets above and to either side of the aircraft. Baumbach examined the ammunition supply system, noting the power-driven feed mechanisms that eliminated jamming problems which plagued German defensive installations. Every gun position featured backup systems, redundant ammunition supplies, and robust mechanical components designed to function reliably under combat stress that would disable more delicate German equipment. Oberingenieur Klaus Weber, Rechlin's chief of bomber evaluation, joined Baumbach in the aircraft's interior with measurement tools and notebooks. Weber had spent 20 years perfecting German bomber design philosophy, emphasizing weight reduction and systems simplification. The B-24's approach violated every principle of efficient aircraft engineering. This aircraft's defensive armament weighs more than our entire Do-17 bomber's useful load. 7,000 pounds of guns, ammunition, turrets, and fire control systems. The Americans have created a bomber that carries a fighter squadron's worth of firepower just to protect itself. Baumbach nodded, understanding the implications. German doctrine assumed bomber formations would rely on fighter escorts for protection against enemy interceptors. The Luftwaffe's own bomber fleet carried defensive armament as supplementary protection, not primary defense. Yet American strategic bombing campaign operated at ranges where fighter escort remained impossible until recently. The B-24's designers had created self-defending bombers capable of fighting their way to targets and back without friendly fighter support. Weber's systematic evaluation revealed engineering sophistication that matched the defensive armament's impressive specifications. The B-24's 4 Pratt & Whitney R1830 twin Wasp engines each produced 1,200 horsepower, driving the 30,000-pound aircraft to maximum speeds approaching 300 miles per hour. More significantly, the engines featured 2-stage supercharging that maintained full power output to altitudes exceeding 25,000 feet, where German fighters struggled with thin air and reduced engine performance. The fuel system incorporated cross-feed capabilities, allowing any engine to draw from any tank, preventing fuel starvation scenarios that routinely killed German bomber crews. Electrical systems featured multiple generators and battery backup power, ensuring critical instruments remained operational even with complete engine failure. Hydraulic circuits included redundant pressure sources and backup manual controls for landing gear and flaps. Every system reflected American design philosophy, prioritizing operational reliability through redundancy rather than weight optimization through simplicity. Weber filled notebook pages with calculations that defied rational explanation by German engineering standards. The B-24's empty weight exceeded 25,000 pounds, nearly triple the weight of a comparable German bomber. Yet performance exceeded Luftwaffe heavy bomber capabilities across every meaningful category. Maximum speed, service ceiling, defensive firepower, and most critically, Operational range exceeded anything German aviation industry could produce under wartime constraints. The bomb load capacity revealed American strategic bombing philosophy with brutal clarity. Internal bomb bay accommodated 8,000 pounds of ordnance in vertical racks that could carry everything from fragmentation clusters to 2,000-pound armor-piercing weapons. The Norden bomb site's precision allowed delivery accuracy that German horizontal bombing could rarely achieve, combined with defensive armament capable of engaging multiple attacking fighters simultaneously. The B-24 represented strategic bombing capability that Luftwaffe doctrine had never anticipated. Baumbach's evaluation flight would provide performance data that intelligence reports couldn't capture. Understanding how this aircraft handled, how its systems integrated, and critically, how its defensive positions coordinated fire control, required first-hand experience that only a test pilot with Baumbach's credentials could provide. Galland's presence at Rechlin emphasized the evaluation's strategic importance. Every Luftwaffe fighter squadron faced these bombers with increasing frequency, suffering casualties that air combat against conventional bombers never inflicted. The pre-flight inspection revealed maintenance complexity that German logistics couldn't support under wartime conditions. Each engine required individual inspection of dozens of systems: cylinder head temperatures, oil pressures, fuel flow, magneto operation, and supercharger function. The defensive armament demanded systematic checks of electrical drives, ammunition feeds, gun charging mechanisms, and turret rotation systems. German bombers consolidated these checks into simplified procedures requiring minimal ground crew time. The B-24 demanded meticulous attention to hundreds of individual components before flight operations could commence safely. Weber accompanied Baumbach through the checklist, recording procedures that revealed American aviation's industrial approach to operational reliability. Electric starters eliminated hand-cranking procedures that German ground crews performed in freezing conditions. Automated mixture controls prevented engine damage from incorrect fuel-air ratios. Synchronized propellers reduced pilot workload during formation flying. Every system incorporated automation designed to reduce human error and ensure operational effectiveness by average crews rather than exceptional ones. The philosophical difference became explicit as Baumbach prepared for his evaluation flight. German aviation had optimized aircraft for performance through weight reduction and systems simplification, creating bombers that required skilled crews to operate effectively under combat conditions. American engineers had accepted weight penalties and mechanical complexity to ensure mission success, regardless of crew skill level or combat damage. The B-24 represented industrial democracy applied to strategic bombing, creating capability through engineering redundancy rather than human excellence. As morning sun climbed higher over Rechlin's test facility, Baumbach settled into the left seat of the B-24's cockpit. The control yoke felt massive in his hands, requiring adjustment from the delicate touch German fighters demanded. 4 throttle levers dominated the center pedestal, each controlling an engine producing more horsepower than entire German fighter power plants. The instrument panel spread across both pilot positions, displaying information with redundancy that German bombers eliminated to save weight and manufacturing complexity. Galland observed from the ground as Baumbach initiated the start sequence for the outboard starboard engine. The electric starter whined, propeller blades turning slowly at first, then accelerating as the radial engine caught with a rattling roar that settled into smooth operation. One by one, the remaining engines started, their combined sound filling Rechlin's morning air with distinctively American thunder. Synchronized propellers eliminated the beating harmonics that plagued German multi-engine aircraft, testament to engineering sophistication that Luftwaffe manufacturers couldn't duplicate. Taxiing the B-24 required techniques foreign to German bomber operations. Tricycle landing gear eliminated ground handling problems that conventional tailwheel configurations created, allowing forward visibility during taxi that German pilots could only dream about. The nosewheel steering responded to rudder pedal inputs with mechanical precision, guiding 30,000 pounds of aircraft across concrete with minimal pilot workload. Everything about the American bomber emphasized operational simplicity achieved through mechanical complexity. Baumbach aligned the Liberator on Rechlin's main runway and advanced throttles smoothly forward. 4 engines responding with power that pressed him back into the seat as acceleration built toward takeoff speed. At 90 knots indicated, the control yoke became responsive. Baumbach eased back pressure, and the B-24 lifted cleanly into German airspace with authority that contradicted its massive weight. The climb rate exceeded German bomber capabilities despite carrying no bombs or ammunition in its defensive positions. At 5,000 feet, Baumbach leveled the aircraft and began systematic evaluation of handling characteristics that would reveal how effectively German fighter pilots could attack these formations. The B-24 responded to control inputs with predictable precision that eliminated surprises. Ailerons provided adequate roll rates for an aircraft this size, elevators offered smooth pitch control without excessive forces, and rudder effectiveness remained good throughout the speed range. Nothing about the handling suggested vulnerability that fighter tactics could exploit. The defensive armament evaluation required ground coordination with Rechlin's fire control specialists, who would observe from multiple vantage points. Baumbach keyed the intercom system, addressing imaginary gunners in each defensive position. The internal communication system worked flawlessly, allowing coordination between widely separated crew positions that German bombers achieved only through hand signals and shouting over engine noise. Weber monitored from the flight engineer's position, calling out engine parameters that confirmed American power plant reliability. Cylinder head temperatures remained well within operating limits despite full power climb. Oil pressures stayed stable across all 4 engines. Fuel consumption matched published specifications, with precision that suggested American manufacturing quality control exceeded Luftwaffe production standards. Every system performed exactly as designed, revealing operational reliability that German aviation could rarely achieve. The performance testing revealed capabilities that explained American strategic bombing effectiveness with uncomfortable clarity. Maximum speed at 20,000 feet exceeded 270 miles per hour, faster than German fighters could sustain in level flight at that altitude. Service ceiling approached 30,000 feet, well above the operational limit where most Luftwaffe interceptors maintained combat effectiveness. Most significantly, the published range of 2,000 miles meant these bombers could strike targets throughout Germany and return to English bases without fighter escort until recently developed long-range P-51 Mustangs made the journey. Baumbach initiated a simulated bombing run, descending to 23,000 feet and establishing the straight and level flight path that bombardiers required for Norden bombsight accuracy. During this vulnerable phase, German fighters concentrated their attacks, knowing bomber formations couldn't maneuver without destroying bombing accuracy. Yet even in this predictable flight regime, the B-24's defensive armament created problems that conventional bombers never presented. The nose turret covered frontal approaches, forcing German fighters to attack from angles where closing speeds exceeded 500 miles per hour, giving pilots less than 2 seconds to aim and fire before overshooting the formation. The ball turret eliminated attacks from directly beneath, removing the blind spot that Luftwaffe doctrine emphasized. Waist guns covered the mid-fuselage from both sides, while the tail position engaged fighters making conventional stern approaches. The top turret filled gaps in coverage, creating a defensive sphere where no safe attack angle existed. German fighter tactics had evolved to exploit bomber defensive weaknesses through coordinated attacks from multiple directions simultaneously, overwhelming gunners who couldn't engage threats from several vectors at once. But the B-24's crew positions provided such comprehensive coverage that coordinated attacks merely ensured multiple defending guns could fire at each attacking fighter. The defensive philosophy had transformed attacking bomber formations from calculated risk into near-suicidal missions against concentrated firepower. Baumbach rolled the B-24 into a gentle turn, evaluating control response at combat maneuvering speeds. The aircraft responded predictably, maintaining altitude without the altitude loss that German bombers suffered during evasive action. The structural strength, evident in every system, suggested the Liberator could survive damage that would destroy conventional bombers. American engineering had built operational survivability into the fundamental design, rather than accepting vulnerability as inevitable cost of strategic bombing operations. The evaluation flight lasted 2 hours, during which Baumbach explored the B-24's complete performance envelope within safety margins appropriate for an irreplaceable intelligence asset. Every test confirmed what Luftwaffe pilots had been reporting from combat operations over Germany. These American bombers represented strategic bombing capability that German defensive doctrine couldn't effectively counter without accepting casualties that would eventually destroy fighter force effectiveness through attrition. As Baumbach brought the Liberator back to Rechlin and executed a landing that required minimal skill compared to German bomber approaches, he understood the fundamental reality that Galland needed documented. The B-24 wasn't just a better bomber than German equivalents. It represented completely different philosophy about strategic air warfare, emphasizing operational reliability, defensive capability, and mission effectiveness over the weight optimization and systems simplification that German engineering tradition demanded. The post-flight debriefing occurred in Rechlin's secured conference room, where senior Luftwaffe officers gathered to hear Baumbach's assessment of American bomber capabilities. Galland sat at the head of the table, flanked by technical specialists who would analyze the evaluation data for tactical intelligence that might reduce German fighter casualties during bomber interception missions. The atmosphere carried professional tension born from understanding that German air defenses faced challenges that conventional fighter tactics couldn't solve. Baumbach opened his flight report with performance data that confirmed the B-24's impressive specifications. Maximum speed at altitude exceeds our He-111 by 30 km per hour, despite carrying 3 times the defensive armament. Service ceiling places these formations above the altitude, where most of our fighters maintain combat effectiveness. Operational range allows strikes throughout Germany from English bases, eliminating the fuel constraints that limit our own strategic bombing capability. The defensive armament analysis challenged German fighter doctrine at its fundamental assumptions about bomber vulnerability. Baumbach described the overlapping fields of fire created by 10 50-caliber machine gun positions, emphasizing that no safe approach angle existed where attacking fighters could avoid defensive fire. The frontal attacks that Luftwaffe pilots had developed to avoid tail gunners now faced nose turret fire with closing speeds that left minimal time for accurate shooting. The traditional stern approach encountered tail guns with ammunition supplies sufficient for sustained engagement. Most disturbing was the ball turret's elimination of attacks from beneath bomber formations. German fighter pilots had achieved significant success, approaching from below where conventional bomber blind spots provided brief windows of vulnerability. The B-24's rotating ball turret covered this vector completely, firing 850 rounds per minute from twin 50-caliber guns that could destroy fighters with brief exposure. Every tactical advantage that Luftwaffe doctrine had developed through bloody experience now faced American engineering solutions that eliminated vulnerability through mechanical innovation. Weber's technical analysis documented manufacturing quality that exceeded German production standards under wartime conditions. The defensive turrets operated with mechanical precision that suggested sophisticated quality control and component manufacturing tolerances that Luftwaffe suppliers couldn't maintain. Ammunition feed systems functioned reliably without the jamming problems that plagued German defensive installations. Electrical power systems provided redundancy, ensuring turret operation even with significant battle damage. Every aspect of the defensive armament reflected American industrial capacity applied to creating reliable weapon systems, rather than simply installing guns in aircraft. Major Hans-Joachim Hermann, an experienced bomber pilot who had transitioned to night fighting, raised the question that haunted every German officer present. How many of these aircraft can they produce? Our intelligence estimates suggest current American production exceeds 40 B, 24 seconds daily. If these numbers are accurate, We face bomber formations that will only grow larger, regardless of our interception success rates. We're fighting industrial capacity, not just tactical capability. Herman's assessment captured the strategic reality that technical evaluation couldn't change. American industrial production had achieved scales that Germany couldn't approach under wartime resource constraints. The B-24 represented not just superior individual aircraft design, but manufacturing capacity that could replace losses faster than German fighters could inflict them. Luftwaffe defensive strategy assumed that inflicting unsustainable casualties on bomber formations would eventually force Americans to abandon daylight strategic bombing. Yet, if American production could absorb losses and continue expanding formation sizes, German fighter force would face attrition warfare it couldn't win. Galland absorbed the technical data with the professional concern of a commander who understood strategic implications beyond individual aircraft specifications. Our pilots report that attacking these formations requires accepting casualties we cannot sustain indefinitely. Your evaluation confirms that their defensive armament creates precisely the threat our combat reports described. The question becomes whether we can develop tactics that reduce our losses to acceptable levels, or whether American bomber capability has made conventional fighter interception strategically futile. The discussion shifted toward tactical solutions that might mitigate the B-24's defensive advantages. Concentrated frontal attacks by entire fighter squadrons might overwhelm nose turret gunners through sheer numbers. Rocket-armed fighters attacking from beyond 50 caliber effective range could damage formations before entering defensive fire zones. Night fighter tactics applied to daylight interception might exploit reduced visibility conditions. Each suggestion faced practical limitations that made implementation problematic. Baumbach provided the sobering assessment that his evaluation flight had confirmed. The Americans have created bombers designed specifically for unescorted deep penetration missions into defended airspace. Every system prioritizes operational reliability and defensive capability over weight optimization or manufacturing simplicity. Our doctrine assumed bombers would remain vulnerable to determined fighter attack. The B-24 challenges that assumption through engineering solutions that eliminate vulnerabilities, rather than accepting them as inevitable cost of strategic bombing. Weber's manufacturing analysis added context that explained American capability to produce such complex aircraft in significant quantities. Their production methods emphasize standardized components and modular assembly that allows rapid manufacturing despite mechanical complexity. Where we optimize individual aircraft performance through custom engineering, they optimize production efficiency through standardized systems that work reliably across thousands of aircraft. The defensive turrets, the engines, the flight control systems all use interchangeable components that simplify maintenance and replacement. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The strategic implications extended beyond the B-24's specific capabilities toward broader questions about German defensive strategy against American strategic bombing campaign. Luftwaffe fighter force faced missions that demanded accepting casualties to achieve marginal success against formations that would only grow larger as American production accelerated. German aviation industry couldn't produce replacement fighters and pilots faster than combat attrition consumed them. The mathematics of industrial warfare suggested outcomes that tactical excellence couldn't overcome. Galland concluded the debriefing with instructions that reflected his understanding of the intelligence Baumbach had provided. Continue detailed evaluation of the captured aircraft's defensive systems. Document firing arcs, ammunition capacities, turret traverse rates, anything that might reveal tactical vulnerabilities our pilots can exploit. Simultaneously, begin development of alternative interception methods that minimize exposure to defensive fire. We cannot abandon bomber interception, but we must adapt tactics to the reality your evaluation has confirmed. As officers departed Rechlin's conference room, Baumbach remained behind with Weber. reviewing technical data that would form the basis for comprehensive reports to higher command. The captured B-24 represented intelligence windfall that provided unprecedented insight into American strategic bombing capability. Yet the knowledge gained from evaluation merely confirmed what German defensive forces had learned through bloody experience over the past year. American bombers had evolved beyond the vulnerability that conventional fighter tactics could exploit effectively. The fundamental challenge facing Luftwaffe wasn't tactical or technical, but strategic and industrial. Germany had entered war, assuming that superior pilot training and aircraft performance would offset numerical disadvantages. American approach to strategic bombing challenged that assumption through engineering solutions that made individual aircraft more capable and industrial production that created numerical superiority simultaneously. The B-24 embodied this philosophy completely, incorporating defensive capability that reduced vulnerability, while production capacity ensured formation sizes that overwhelmed German interception capability through sheer numbers. Weber closed his notebook as afternoon shadows lengthened across Rechlin's test facility. We've documented American aviation supremacy with mathematical precision that cannot be dismissed through institutional prejudice. The question is whether our leadership will acknowledge what this evaluation proves, or continue assuming that German tactical excellence can overcome American industrial capacity. Baumbach understood Weber's concern reflected broader anxiety throughout Luftwaffe command structure. Admitting American technological and industrial superiority challenged core assumptions about German military capability that had guided strategy since the war's beginning. Yet denying reality evident in every aspect of the captured B-24's design merely ensured that German fighter pilots would continue facing missions that demanded accepting unsustainable casualties against steadily growing bomber formations. The systematic evaluation of the captured B-24 continued through September 1943, as Rechlin's technical staff conducted increasingly detailed analysis of systems that revealed American aviation philosophy with uncomfortable clarity. Each subsequent test flight exposed capabilities that German bomber doctrine had never considered necessary or achievable within practical engineering constraints. The defensive armament received particular attention as Luftwaffe tactical specialists sought vulnerabilities that fighter pilots might exploit during interception missions. Oberleutnant Friedrich Lang, a former bomber pilot with extensive combat experience, volunteered to man the B-24's defensive positions during ground testing that would document fields of fire and engagement capabilities. Lang had survived 43 missions over England before transferring to test duties at Rechlin, giving him practical understanding of defensive gunnery that theoretical analysis couldn't provide. His evaluation of the American gun positions would provide tactical intelligence crucial to developing effective attack strategies. The nose turret examination revealed why frontal attacks, the tactic Luftwaffe pilots had adopted to avoid tail gunner fire, proved so costly against B-24 formations. Lang squeezed into the rotating turret and tested its traverse mechanisms, finding electric motors that rotated the position through nearly 180 degrees with minimal physical effort. The twin 50 caliber guns pointed forward, their ammunition boxes holding 500 rounds fed through power-driven mechanisms that eliminated the manual charging procedures German defensive positions required. Most significantly, the turret's plexiglass provided nearly unrestricted visibility forward and to both sides. German bomber defensive positions typically offered limited fields of view through small windows or cramped openings. The American design philosophy emphasized giving gunners maximum situational awareness, allowing early target acquisition and extended tracking time against approaching fighters. Lang could see attacking aircraft from extreme range, begin tracking their approach, and maintain fire throughout their attack run with mechanical precision that manual gun mounts couldn't approach. The ball turret represented engineering innovation that German aviation had never attempted. Lang lowered himself into the cramped sphere, finding the position impossibly confining yet mechanically sophisticated. Foot pedals controlled azimuth rotation, while hand controls adjusted elevation, allowing the gunner to track targets through complete hemispheric coverage beneath the aircraft. The twin 50 caliber guns protruded from the turret's front, their barrels converging at a point approximately 200 yards ahead where most fighter attacks would occur. Operating the ball turret required coordination that would challenge average gunners, yet the mechanical systems reduced physical demands to levels that allowed sustained operation during extended missions. German defensive positions exhausted gunners through physical effort required to traverse heavy machine guns against slipstream forces. The American electric drives eliminated this fatigue factor, allowing gunners to maintain combat effectiveness throughout missions lasting 8 to 10 hours. The tactical advantage was profound, ensuring defensive capability remained constant rather than degrading as crews tired during long-range bombing missions. The waist gun positions revealed American solutions to problems German bombers simply accepted as operational limitations. Lang examined the flexible gun mounts, finding them mechanically simple yet highly effective within their design parameters. Each 50 caliber weapon swiveled on a mounting that balanced the gun's weight, allowing traverse with minimal physical effort despite slipstream forces that would overwhelm conventional manual installations. Ammunition boxes positioned beside each gun held sufficient rounds for extended engagements, while spent cartridge deflectors prevented brass casings from accumulating underfoot, where they could create hazards during combat maneuvering. The open waist windows presented apparent vulnerability that German fighters might exploit, yet Lang recognized that this opening also provided gunners with excellent visibility and field of fire, covering the aircraft's midsection from both sides. Attacking fighters approaching from beam angles would face coordinated fire from both waist gunners simultaneously, doubling the defensive firepower compared to single gun positions in German bombers. The crossfire capability eliminated safe approach angles that German tactical doctrine had identified as optimal for attacks against conventional bomber defensive arrangements. The tail gunner position occupied its own isolated compartment at the extreme aft fuselage, accessible only through a narrow crawlway over the bomb bay. Lang entered this position and immediately understood why tail gunners earned respect throughout bomber crews. The isolation was complete, separated from the rest of the crew by the entire length of the aircraft with only intercom communication maintaining connection to other positions. Yet the defensive capability this position provided justified the psychological challenge of fighting from such remote quarters. Twin 50 caliber guns pointed rearward through an armored mounting that protected the gunner from return fire while providing excellent visibility through plexiglass panels. The field of fire covered the entire rear hemisphere, overlapping with coverage from the top turret and waist positions to create defensive depth that forced attacking fighters to run a gauntlet of concentrated fire. German fighters making conventional stern approaches would face sustained fire from multiple gun positions, accumulating hits throughout their attack run, rather than facing brief exposure to single defensive weapons. Lang's most significant discovery involved the coordination between defensive positions that American crew training emphasized. Unlike German bombers, where each gunner operated independently, engaging targets within their individual fields of fire, the B-24's defensive philosophy assumed coordinated fire from multiple positions against single threats. The intercom system facilitated communication, allowing gunners to call out approaching fighters, coordinate fire on priority targets, and avoid duplicating effort against threats already under engagement by other positions. This tactical coordination transformed 10 individual machine guns into an integrated defensive system that multiplied effectiveness beyond simple addition of firepower. A fighter approaching from the front quarter would face fire from the nose turret, top turret, and potentially one waist position simultaneously. The combined rate of fire exceeded 2,000 rounds per minute, creating a cone of defensive fire that made penetrating to effective attack range extremely hazardous. German fighters had to accept this concentrated fire while attempting to aim and shoot accurately during high-speed closure that lasted only seconds. Weber's ammunition analysis revealed American logistical capacity that supported the defensive armament's impressive specifications. Each 50 caliber gun position carried sufficient ammunition for sustained combat, with total defensive ammunition load exceeding 6,000 rounds. This represented firepower sufficient for extended engagements against multiple attacking fighters throughout missions lasting most of a day. German bombers carried defensive ammunition measured in hundreds of rounds per gun, forcing gunners to conserve fire and accept vulnerability when ammunition depleted during prolonged attacks. The 50 caliber ammunition itself demonstrated American manufacturing precision that German wartime production couldn't duplicate. Each cartridge featured brass casings manufactured to tolerances that ensured reliable feeding through power-driven mechanisms. The projectiles incorporated armor-piercing cores that could penetrate German fighter armor at ranges exceeding 800 yards. Incendiary compounds ignited upon impact, creating visible strike indications that helped gunners adjust their aim. Every aspect of the ammunition reflected American industrial capacity, applied to creating reliable munitions that functioned flawlessly under combat conditions. Major Hermann examined the defensive armament evaluation data with growing concern about tactical implications for German fighter operations. Our pilots report that attacking B-24 formations requires closing to within 500 meters to achieve effective hits with 20mm cannon. Yet your analysis confirms that defensive fire becomes lethal at ranges exceeding 800 meters. This means our fighters must accept concentrated fire throughout their entire attack approach, with no safe standoff range where they can engage without exposure to defensive weapons. The tactical reality was worse than simple range comparison suggested. German fighters attacked at speeds often exceeding 500 kilometers per hour, giving pilots less than 3 seconds to aim, fire, and break away before overshooting the bomber formation. During those critical seconds, they faced defensive fire from multiple gun positions simultaneously, each firing at rates that created virtual walls of steel through which attacking fighters had to fly. The probability of sustaining damage during attack runs approached certainty, transforming bomber interception from calculated risk into mission requiring acceptance of casualties as inevitable cost of engagement. Baumbach's follow-up evaluation flights explored tactical scenarios that might reveal defensive weaknesses German fighters could exploit. He flew the B-24 through evasive maneuvers that bomber formations might employ, testing whether violent attitude changes would disrupt gunner tracking or create momentary blind spots in defensive coverage. The aircraft's structural strength and control authority allowed maneuvering that would stress conventional bombers beyond design limits, yet defensive positions remained effective throughout these violent gyrations. The nose turret maintained aim during climbs and descents that would disorient gunners in fixed positions. The ball turret continued tracking during banking turns that exposed the aircraft's underside. Tail guns remained effective during skidding maneuvers, designed to throw off pursuing fighters' aim. Every test confirmed that American engineering had created defensive capability that remained effective across the complete flight envelope, rather than only during straight and level bombing runs, where German doctrine assumed vulnerability would be greatest. The evaluation program expanded to include German fighter pilots who would practice attack runs against the stationary B-24 on Rechlin's apron, allowing gunners in the defensive positions to track their approaches and simulate engagement without live fire. These exercises revealed the psychological impact of facing 10 50 caliber machine gun positions simultaneously. Pilots reported that approaching the bomber, even knowing the guns held no ammunition, created instinctive evasion responses that disrupted aim and forced breakaway maneuvers earlier than tactical doctrine recommended. Hauptmann Heinz Nock, an experienced fighter pilot with 63 confirmed victories, participated in these simulated attacks and provided sobering assessment of what he observed. The defensive coverage is comprehensive to the point where no safe attack angle exists. Frontal approaches face the nose turret with excellent forward visibility. Beam attacks encounter waist guns from both sides, plus the ball turret. Stern approaches meet tail guns, with ammunition sufficient for sustained fire. Even diving attacks from above face the top turret with traversing capability that tracks targets throughout their attack run. The Americans have eliminated every tactical advantage our doctrine depends upon. The comparison with German bomber defensive philosophy revealed fundamental differences in strategic assumptions about bomber vulnerability and fighter effectiveness. Luftwaffe bombers carried defensive armament as supplementary protection, assuming that fighter escorts would provide primary defense against enemy interceptors. The limited ammunition capacity, manual gun mounts, and restricted fields of fire reflected this doctrine that bombers couldn't reasonably defend themselves against determined fighter attack without escort support. American strategic bombing doctrine had evolved differently, recognizing that deep penetration missions into defended territory would operate beyond fighter escort range for extended periods. The B-24's defensive armament represented primary protection rather than supplementary capability, designed to allow bomber formations to fight their way to targets and back without friendly fighter support. The 10-50 caliber machine gun positions, power-driven turrets, and extensive ammunition capacity reflected this strategic reality that German aviation had never fully confronted. The industrial implications extended beyond individual aircraft capability toward questions about manufacturing capacity and resource allocation. Each B-24's defensive armament required precision, manufacturing of turret components, electrical drive systems, ammunition feed mechanisms, and fire control equipment. German industry struggled to produce comparable systems even in limited quantities, yet American factories delivered 40 B-24 seconds daily, with complete defensive installations that functioned reliably under combat conditions. The industrial capacity gap was profound, suggesting that even if German engineering could match American design philosophy, manufacturing capability couldn't support production at scales necessary to matter strategically. Weber's final technical report documented the B-24's defensive capabilities with scientific precision that eliminated any possibility of dismissing American bomber effectiveness as propaganda or exaggeration. The defensive armament represented engineering solutions to tactical problems that German aviation had accepted as inherent limitations of bomber operations. American designers had refused to accept vulnerability, instead creating mechanical systems that transformed bombers from defenseless targets into heavily armed aircraft capable of inflicting severe casualties on attacking fighters. The strategic assessment that accompanied technical documentation challenged Luftwaffe defensive strategy at its fundamental assumptions. German fighter force faced bomber formations whose defensive capabilities exceeded anything doctrine had anticipated. The conventional tactics of concentrated attacks from favorable angles no longer provided safety margins that made interception missions survivable. American bombers had evolved into aircraft that could fight back effectively, creating attrition warfare where German fighters would eventually exhaust themselves through casualties that American production could replace while Luftwaffe couldn't. Galland received Weber's comprehensive evaluation report in late September 1943 and immediately recognized implications that extended beyond tactical adjustments to strategic reassessment of German defensive capabilities. The captured B-24 had provided intelligence confirming what combat reports suggested, but institutional prejudice had resisted acknowledging. American strategic bombing capability had reached levels that conventional German fighter defense couldn't counter effectively, without fundamental changes in tactics, equipment, and strategic priorities. The October 1943 conference at Luftwaffe High Command Headquarters brought together senior officers responsible for German air defense strategy. Galland presented Rechlin's B-24 evaluation findings alongside combat statistics that painted grim picture of fighter effectiveness against American bomber formations. German fighter losses during bomber interception missions had reached unsustainable levels, with replacement rates falling behind attrition despite maximum production efforts. American bomber formations continued growing larger, suggesting that even current casualty rates weren't deterring strategic bombing campaign expansion. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commanding the Luftwaffe, listened to Galland's presentation with visible frustration that reflected his unwillingness to accept evidence contradicting his assumptions about German air superiority. "Our fighters are the finest in the world, flown by pilots whose training exceeds any enemy nation." These American bombers are simply large targets that disciplined attack can destroy. The solution is better tactics and more aggressive pilots, not acceptance of enemy technical superiority. Galland's response carried the professional authority of a combat veteran who had commanded fighter wings before assuming responsibility for all Luftwaffe fighter operations. The captured aircraft evaluation proves that B-24 defensive capabilities exceed our previous estimates. 10 50 caliber machine guns create fields of fire with no safe approach angles. Our pilots must fly through concentrated defensive fire to achieve effective attack range, accepting casualties as certain rather than probable outcome. We're fighting bomber formations that can defend themselves effectively without fighter escort, something our doctrine never anticipated. The institutional resistance to acknowledging American technological achievement reflected broader German unwillingness to admit that industrial capacity could overcome tactical excellence and engineering tradition. Luftwaffe leadership had built careers on assumptions about German military superiority that made accepting enemy advantages psychologically difficult. Yet combat statistics couldn't be dismissed through nationalist rhetoric. German fighter pilot casualties during bomber interception missions exceeded replacement training capacity, creating experience deficit that would eventually destroy defensive capability through accumulated losses of skilled aviators. The tactical alternatives discussed during the conference reflected desperate attempts to develop solutions that might reduce German fighter casualties to sustainable levels. Rocket-armed fighters attacking from beyond defensive gun range might damage formations without entering killing zones. Concentrated frontal attacks by entire fighter wings might overwhelm nose turret gunners through sheer numbers. Night interception tactics applied to daylight operations might exploit reduced visibility conditions. Each proposal faced practical limitations that made implementation problematic or effectiveness questionable. Major Hermann advocated for alternative approaches that avoided direct engagement with B-24 defensive armament entirely. Instead of attacking the bombers themselves, we should focus on destroying their fighter escorts. Without P-51 Mustangs providing protection, the bomber formations become more vulnerable to conventional interception tactics. We redirect our effort toward winning air superiority rather than accepting attrition warfare against heavily defended bomber formations. The strategy Hermann proposed reflected recognition that German fighter force couldn't sustain casualties that bomber interception missions inflicted. Yet avoiding bomber engagement entirely meant accepting that American strategic bombing would continue uncontested, destroying German industrial capacity through accumulated damage that conventional air defense couldn't prevent. The tactical dilemma admitted no easy solutions, forcing choices between unpalatable alternatives that reflected Germany's deteriorating strategic position. Galland concluded the conference with assessment that captured the fundamental challenge facing Luftwaffe defensive operations. American aviation industry has created bomber capability that our current fighter force cannot counter effectively. The B-24's defensive armament represents engineering solution to vulnerability that we assumed was inherent in bomber operations. Until we develop weapons and tactics that neutralize this defensive capability, our pilots will continue accepting casualties that we cannot sustain indefinitely. The strategic reality is that American industrial capacity allows them to replace losses while maintaining formation growth. We face attrition warfare that mathematics suggests we cannot win. The captured B-24 remained at Rechlin through winter 1943 and into spring 1944, serving as training aid for Luftwaffe pilots preparing for bomber interception missions. New fighter pilots would practice attack runs against the stationary aircraft, learning to identify defensive gun positions and understand fields of fire they would face during actual combat. The experience proved sobering for pilots who had trained against conventional target representations. Seeing 10 actual 50 caliber gun positions created visceral understanding of the defensive capability that training lectures couldn't convey effectively. Baumbach occasionally returned to Rechlin and observed these training sessions, noting how young pilots reacted to their first close examination of American bomber defensive armament. The initial confidence that superior German fighters and pilot training would prove decisive typically faded after walking around the B-24 and counting gun positions that covered every approach angle. The aircraft served as monument to American engineering philosophy that had transformed bomber vulnerability into capability through mechanical solutions and industrial execution. The strategic bombing campaign over Germany intensified throughout 1944 as American production delivered bombers in quantities that overwhelmed Luftwaffe defensive capacity. B-24 formations grew from dozens to hundreds of aircraft, escorted by P-51 Mustangs, whose range finally provided fighter protection throughout missions into Germany's industrial heartland. German fighter pilots faced missions requiring engagement with these massive formations, accepting casualties that evaluation of the captured B-24 had predicted with uncomfortable accuracy. Combat reports from Luftwaffe fighter units confirmed what Rechlin's technical evaluation had documented. The B-24's defensive armament created casualty rates that German fighter force couldn't sustain operationally. Experienced pilots were being lost faster than training programs could replace them, creating expertise deficit that reduced overall fighter effectiveness, even as new aircraft continued rolling from production facilities. The Americans had achieved strategic success not through superior individual aircraft performance alone, but through systematic integration of defensive capability, industrial production, and tactical doctrine that German aviation couldn't match. Major Hermann's night fighter operations provided temporary respite from daylight bomber casualties, but couldn't prevent the strategic devastation that American bombing campaign inflicted on German industrial capacity. Factories producing fighters, synthetic fuel plants, ball-bearing manufacturing facilities, all fell to precision bombing that the Norden bomb site enabled. The defensive armament that made attacking B-24 formations so costly also ensured that sufficient numbers reached their targets to deliver ordnance with effect that accumulated into strategic impact. By mid-1944, the captured B-24 at Rechlin represented historical artifact rather than active intelligence asset. Everything the aircraft could reveal about American bomber capability had been documented, analyzed, and disseminated to Luftwaffe operational units. Yet the intelligence gained from evaluation had provided no solutions to the strategic challenge American strategic bombing presented. German fighter pilots now understood exactly why attacking B-24 formations proved so costly, but that knowledge didn't reduce casualties or increase defensive effectiveness. Weber observed the captured bomber during a WWII visit to Rechlin in June 1944 and reflected on what 3 years of American bomber evaluation had revealed about competing approaches to strategic air warfare. We began this war assuming that superior German engineering and pilot training would offset any numerical disadvantages. The captured B-24 proves that American aviation pursued different strategy entirely. They created bombers that ordinary crews could fly effectively into heavily defended territory, protected by defensive armament that conventional fighter tactics couldn't overcome. Industrial capacity allowed them to produce these aircraft in quantities that made individual losses irrelevant to strategic campaign continuation. The philosophical transformation Weber described reflected broader German recognition that industrial warfare followed different rules than the tactical excellence that military tradition emphasized. American approach to strategic bombing succeeded not through technological surprise or operational brilliance, but through systematic application of industrial capacity to creating sustainable advantages that accumulated over extended campaigns. The B-24's defensive armament represented one aspect of this philosophy, eliminating bomber vulnerability through engineering rather than accepting it as inherent limitation that tactics must work around. As Allied armies advanced across France following D-Day landings in June 1944, Rechlin began preparing to evacuate its captured aircraft collection eastward, beyond advancing American forces. The B-24 would be destroyed rather than recaptured, eliminating American access to German evaluation data that documents contained. Yet the intelligence value of that evaluation had already been realized and disseminated throughout Luftwaffe command structure. The physical aircraft's loss would eliminate training aid but wouldn't erase the uncomfortable truths its evaluation had revealed. Baumbach made final inspection tour of the captured B-24 inches August 1944, knowing that demolition charges would soon reduce the aircraft to scrap metal. Walking beneath the ball turret, examining the nose turret's electric drives, counting ammunition boxes that had fed 10 50 caliber machine guns, he reflected on how completely American engineering had solved problems that German doctrine had considered inherent to bomber operations. The defensive capability built into this single aircraft exceeded the total defensive armament of entire German bomber squadrons. The systematic evaluation had documented American aviation philosophy with precision that eliminated doubt or debate. They had created strategic bombing capability through industrial abundance rather than tactical elegance, operational reliability rather than peak performance, and defensive capability rather than accepted vulnerability. German responses had proven inadequate because they attempted to solve industrial problems through tactical excellence, accepting attrition that mathematics proved unsustainable while hoping that pilot skill would overcome material disadvantage. Weber joined Baumbach for the final examination before demolition, carrying notebooks filled with technical data that would survive even after the physical aircraft disappeared. 3 years ago, we believed German aviation represented the pinnacle of military aircraft development. This captured bomber proved that American engineering had pursued different path entirely, one that prioritized operational effectiveness over theoretical efficiency. The lesson isn't about specific technical features, but about fundamental philosophy. They built what worked rather than what looked elegant on engineering drawings. The demolition occurred on September 3rd, 1944, as American armies approached Rechlin from the west. Carefully placed charges reduced the B-24 to twisted wreckage that denied its recapture, while also destroying the most tangible evidence of American bomber capability that German evaluation had documented. Yet, the intelligence gained from systematic analysis survived in technical reports distributed throughout Luftwaffe command structure, providing knowledge that couldn't change strategic reality, but at least explained why German fighter defense struggled against American bomber formations. The final assessment of the captured B-24's significance appeared in Weber's classified report to Luftwaffe Technical Command dated September 15, 1944. American B-24 Liberator represents strategic bombing capability that conventional fighter defense cannot effectively counter. Defensive armament creates casualty rates our pilot training cannot replace. Industrial production delivers aircraft quantities that render individual losses strategically irrelevant. Combined with fighter escort range that now covers missions throughout German territory, American bomber formations have achieved air superiority that we cannot contest without accepting forced destruction through attrition. The captured aircraft evaluation documented enemy capability with precision, but provided no solutions to strategic disadvantage that our industrial capacity cannot overcome. The uncomfortable truth that evaluation had revealed extended beyond technical specifications to fundamental understanding about how industrial democracies fought wars differently than authoritarian regimes anticipated. American aviation industry had created bomber capability through systematic application of resources and engineering talent to practical problems, accepting weight penalties and complexity costs that German doctrine would reject as inefficient. Yet that inefficiency translated into operational effectiveness that tactical excellence couldn't counter, creating sustainable advantages that accumulated into strategic superiority. German fighter pilots continued facing B-24 formations throughout the remaining months of the war, accepting casualties that captured aircraft evaluation had predicted with grim accuracy. The 10 50 caliber machine guns that had impressed observers at Rechlin proved just as deadly in actual combat, creating defensive fire that made bomber interception missions nearly suicidal for German fighter pilots. American production continued delivering new B-24 seconds faster than German fighters could destroy them, ensuring that formation sizes grew even as individual aircraft fell to defensive fire. The strategic bombing campaign that the B-24 helped execute contributed significantly to German military collapse through systematic destruction of industrial capacity. Factories producing aircraft, synthetic fuel facilities, transportation infrastructure, all fell to precision bombing delivered by formations whose defensive capability made interception prohibitively costly. The indirect effect proved as important as direct damage, forcing Germany to divert resources toward air defense that might otherwise have supported ground operations against Allied armies advancing from east and west. By war's end in May 1945, the B-24 Liberator had become one of the most produced military aircraft in history, with over 18,000 examples delivered by American factories. The defensive armament that German evaluation had documented so thoroughly had proven its worth through combat effectiveness that made strategic bombing campaigns survivable despite operating deep into enemy territory. American engineering philosophy, emphasizing operational reliability and defensive capability, had created bomber that could fight its way to targets and back, accomplishing strategic objectives that conventional bombers could never achieve. The legacy of the captured B-24 evaluation extended beyond its immediate intelligence value to influence post-war understanding about relationships between industrial capacity, engineering philosophy, and military effectiveness. German aviation had pursued tactical excellence through weight optimization and pilot skill requirements, creating impressive individual aircraft that demanded exceptional operators. American approach emphasized operational effectiveness through redundancy and defensive capability, creating aircraft that ordinary crews could employ successfully under combat conditions that would overwhelm conventionally designed bombers. The captured aircraft program's documentation survived the war and eventually became available to aviation historians, studying how competing design philosophies produced such different results from similar technological starting points. The systematic evaluation that Baumbach, Weber, and Galland conducted provided unique perspective on American bomber capability, as understood by the very adversaries those aircraft were designed to defeat. Their professional assessments, stripped of propaganda and nationalist rhetoric, revealed respect for engineering achievement that had solved fundamental problems through approaches German doctrine had never seriously considered. The B-24 Liberator stood as testament to American industrial philosophy applied to military aviation, creating capability through abundance rather than elegance, reliability rather than peak performance, and defensive strength rather than accepted vulnerability. The 1050 caliber machine guns that had so impressed German evaluators represented just one aspect of systematic design approach that prioritized mission success over theoretical efficiency. That philosophy, multiplied across thousands of aircraft and supported by industrial capacity that could sustain production despite wartime demands, and had created strategic bombing capability that changed warfare fundamentally. The uncomfortable admission German pilots had made that the B-24's defensive armament made it nearly untouchable reflected recognition that American engineering had succeeded where German doctrine assumed success was impossible. Bombers could defend themselves effectively against fighter attack through mechanical systems, rather than requiring fighter escort or accepting vulnerability as inevitable cost of strategic operations. The revelation challenged assumptions about aircraft design and military effectiveness that would influence aviation development long after the specific aircraft involved had been retired or destroyed. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.